There are a ton of broken meta heavy tanks like the 279E or Chieftain that are not what you typically think a heavy tank is, but today it's time to show the crazy and heavily armoured tanks reversing the meta and taking their place back at the top. So today we've got one of the most powerful vehicles up first. There are 3 replays that we're going to look through in today's video and hopefully give you a good showcase of how you can use these tanks on various different maps to come away with a win, and why you may even potentially want to pick up these vehicles at some point in the future on your World of Tanks, a grinding journey as you know what the game is like. Now I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video you know about the Maus, and we all know about the horrible weak points that it does. And yes, the tank does have horrible weak points that if you do get caught out or you're exposing yourselves in terrible positions, or if you're essentially coming up one-on-one with another tank that has heat ammunition, the Maus just sucks because of the flat plates on the cheek. If it looks at you directly, it can basically be penned by most tier 10s in the game. It has a huge lower plate that can be penned by premium very easily, and even standard ammunition. And yeah, it's a big old flat boy, especially if anyone finds the side of you. Yeah, it can be horrible as well. But what isn't horrible is when people are firing at your tracks, or they're catching you at a disgusting angle to the point where it's just gonna bounce off. That big flat armor, it does actually work sometimes, and you'll find yourselves in so many games where people just didn't quite understand that the Maus is not just a auto pen, and you do actually have to aim sometimes. And I mean, especially against lower tier vehicles, which you're seeing here, it really can be a pain in the backside to pen the Maus, because you do just need that high penetration. Since it is a thick armor block, it is not a case of, you know, being able to find the weak point. Even if you are a tier 10, you can pretty much do that, but if you are lower tier than the Maus, it can be a real problem. And whilst these tanks are bouncing off of the Maus, reload is very nice. You're able to deal a ton of damage in a short period of time. Having that lower alpha damage means that you aren't going to get caught out for as long, and you can also pin down opponents a lot more than you would with some of the other heavy tanks in the game, things like the E100, of course the other competitive tier 10 heavy tank from the German line, and we have an even more competitive tank than the E100 coming up after this one, so stay tuned for that. And if you are enjoying the content so far, then please do think about subscribing. We've just hit 4,000, which is absolutely crazy, and you guys are amazing for the amount of support that you've been showing over the last month or 2 months, and since the channel has been alive basically. So I really do appreciate it, and I just wanted to get that in there. But back to the action. So far in this game, the Maus has blocked 5,000 damage, and although you can do this quite consistently with the Maus if you're using the armor right, and you do come up against lower tier vehicles, as soon as you do come up against those higher tier vehicles, you will start getting penned quite often, and the matchup is very favourable in this game. I mean, 2 tier 10s either side. It's going to be pretty horrible for the enemy team to come up against this. One thing that you should always do when you are playing in your super heavy tanks to be able to maximize both the damage that you're doing and also have an impact and use your hit points, because ultimately you are the tank that is supposed to be at the front line, you are supposed to be grinding. Sniping at the back with the Maus is a terrible idea. I mean, you are so slow that you won't be able to push forward and get any more damage if you do start winning the game really well. And of course, if you're losing really badly, you're just going to get flanked and swamped by about 10 different tanks all at once. So making sure that you do actually get forward and have an impact early in the game is going to be able to grant you the highest potential damage that you will get with a tank like this, because there's nothing worse than kind of feeling like you haven't done anything 5 minutes into the game and then the game is already over, either by you losing so badly or you're just winning that good. Now you're seeing a delaying retreat here from the Maus, which is a perfect tactic that you can use in your own gameplay, and I'd highly recommend it in these slow heavies, whereby, you know, you're not directly turning around and running away, but you're more reversing, using the buildings and obstacles between you and where you want to be at the end of the game and where the rest of your teammates are, because remember, heavy tanks don't have amazing damage per minute typically to be able to really confront tons of tanks. So having that team support really does help out, and doing this delaying tactic whereby, you know, you're slowly reversing your way back whilst also stopping opponents from just kind of blindly YOLOing you by staying there and dealing a bit of damage at interval points. Yeah, it really is the best way of kind of pushing at this late stage, or at least pushing back from where you need to be in this losing game. Now, you're seeing here a very nice kind of distraction for both the enemy team and of course his team, in that they are trying to YOLO the Kari and the WZ. Now unfortunately WZ does get taken out, but the Mouse isn't completely oblivious to the fact that he does need to do something and help out the team, and in fact he's actually trying to help out his team because he understands that if you're in a 1 versus 6 with the Mouse at the point at which you're out in an open place, you're probably not going to be ending up too well. But don't worry, the armor is holding up, and it's very, very nice to see at least once in a while the Mouse's armor working as intended. And you can see 8,500 damage block with over 7,000 damage, and finishing off the only other tier 10 in the game left alive, which was the IS-4. Perfect to see. And now with the UDES and the IS-2 pushing in, they realise that they've absolutely buggered this one up, and unfortunately for them they're going to find themselves in a horrible position up against one of the more annoying tier 10 tanks probably at this point in the game, on the amount of hit points he's on, to really come away with any level of win. Now he tries to go for the top of the turret of the IS-2-2, which is a really bad weak point of the IS-2, of course, with that turret being that you can often overmatch it, but he doesn't need to overmatch the engine deck of the vehicle as he pens it from above. And unfortunately the UDES is going to struggle, especially when he tries to ram one of the heaviest, or if not the heaviest, tanks in the game. So it's now a 1 versus 3, having dealt with 2 tanks, making it a potential Kolobanovs within this game, and it is a brilliant example of target priority. He knows that the Hawk 12 does indeed have a low hit points, but he does not go for him at this point in time, because although that tank does have pretty good heat rounds that are capable of penning the Mouse, he does need to really get rid of some of these mediums, since they are going to be a big pain in the backside. And although the Hawk is now pushing, he's managed to get himself far enough back such that the T-28 is now in a pretty bad spot. And now what you want to make sure that you're doing is getting rid of those low health vehicles, and in the fact that he's reloading now, and with the Hawk trying to get from behind, giving him a easy opportunity to do so, and the T-28 not managing to pen the inner drive wheel of the Mouse, it does not look good for the enemy team. And hopefully we'll be able to see him pump around into the T-28. He does, and brings the damage total above 10,900 damage, which is absolutely insane. And it's lovely to see a tank like this working as intended with its armor, blocking over 12,500 damage and dealing 11,000 damage as well. So what a round with the Mouse, and why it is so powerful, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed so far. But don't switch off of this video, because we have got some more replays that are absolutely just as good. And of course that's it for the Mouse, but now we have the 60 TP, another tank that is heavily armoured and relies on having that armour as well as the alpha damage that it has over things like the Mouse, with this tank getting 750 damage. Much like the E100, it is a more heavily armoured version of these heavy tanks that is capable of dealing a ton of damage in a smaller amount of shells, sacrificing the reload and the ability to be maybe kind of as flexible, I guess, although this tank is actually pretty good in general and is capable of smacking out huge amounts of damage, as you saw there against the KV-4 Kreslav. And although it's not always sunshine and rainbows for the 60 TP, usually getting Amarak, I've seen so many Amaraks of this vehicle, it still does lack in penetration as well, so it only gets 317 pen on its premium rounds, which is very good, don't get me wrong, and is capable of dealing with a lot of vehicles in the game. It still isn't perfect, and you will find every now and again that you just genuinely struggle against some of the heavily armoured vehicles that you're trying to compete with. Now, The 60 TP in this game is going to have an absolute brilliant result, and it's a showcase of how you can use the 60 TP as well. Much like we saw the Maos in the first game, this one's going to be devastating. Now with the broken Chinese heavy tanks in the game, and I'm not talking about the tech tree ones, I'm talking about the tier 8 premium tier 10, the BZ176 on the enemy team, which can deal pretty much the exact same amount of damage that you can in a tier 10 heavy, and probably has a better turret than you because you can't actually pen it unless you manage to find it from above and hit into the top of the turret above the gun. But you know, it's absolutely fine and balanced, but what isn't balanced is when the 60 TP actually can find the hull armor of the tank and manages to flank around the hill and be able to get into a position like this. Because why is that? Well, it's because you can actually use the turret armor of this tank and the ability to kind of push out a ton of damage against opponents that are going to struggle. I mean, that when they can only see the turret of this tank, it does have a fairly good one, and although it can be penned in the cupolas, you always know about the cupolas of tanks like this, where they are tiny, and in order to hit them you have to get lucky and you have to rely on RNG, which is never a good thing within World of Tanks. As we always know, trying to roll the RNG casino is never a good idea, and you're probably going to feel a little bit hurt by the rolls that you do get. But so far in this game, 6,000 damage, and it's not looking too good for this team either. They're down by 6,000 hit points, which is never a good sign. They've lost the entire right hand side of Westfield, which is also never good, and although he has full health, you've got to use that very wisely at this point in time, and you need to make sure that you are supporting your teammates and being useful for your team, since they're going to rely on your hit points. And of course, you being a tier 10, one of only 4 left in the game, even though there were a ton of tier 10s at the beginning of this game comparatively to the Maos game. But one thing that you don't want to be finding yourself is caught out in the open. So using buildings and stuff like that with this tank is a great way of remaining healthy, and hence why you're seeing him manage to get himself in between the town area in the center to be able to at least try and spot for his team, or maybe just swing up on some people and be ready to fire when some of the tanks like the EOC even 90 maybe get a shift on and do something. Now the enemy team are really driving the nail into the coffin of this game, and they're up by over 5,000 damage, and it's really not looking good. But with finding a FV4005 and having the potential of actually loading a HE, I mean, if intuition is a thing within the perks and crew of this player right here, we may even see one of the nicest rolls you can have in this tank. And what makes it super horrible for a tank like the FV4005, and unfortunately for him, he does not realize whatsoever that he has indeed royally messed this one up, and with a intuition to the HE, 945 damage, and the FV4005 has truly really buggered that one up. But now the CS52 list is coming for the 60 TP, and unfortunately for this Polish medium, the Polish top dog heavy is not going to have any of it. And with only a small chunk of hit points on the CS52, it only takes 2 shots to be able to deal with a full health medium. And at this stage in the game, you just really have to start doing something, and with a very lucky shot into the CS, he manages to clap him for 744 damage, which is perfect because now he can push towards the cap circle, which is of course the pressure point in this game. And with the alpha that this tank gets, the RU251 on only 469 hit points is not going to have too much fun when he gets hit by one of these rounds. But now we see the object 283, a tank that you don't want to leave just constantly firing at you because it is a potential to deal damage. And although he hits the Barask blind in the cap, who sat behind the vehicle that he's just taken out, and resetting it, it does allow him to actually start doing something. And with things like the CS52 trying to make their way to regain some of that hit point loss that they had, only ends up ending in a tears for the CS, and he's going to find it very difficult to recoup any more hit points in this game as he's back in the garage. But With the Object 140, of course, a pretty lethal tank if you do let it get the side of a heavy like this, since you know the 60TP's armor on the side is not particularly amazing, even if it does get a little bit of space. And with the accuracy that this tank gets not being superly amazing, you do have to make sure that you're hitting. But when you do hit, you've got that high alpha and you're capable of dealing a ton of damage, and hence why in this game he's picked up over 10,000 damage already, and there is still 2,200 hit points worth of damage to potentially pick up in the game. And the Barask royally messed that one up as well and ends up back in the garage with his friends that have tried to take on the 60TP, and unfortunately he does get tracked by the Object 283. I guess at least he didn't pen, but now he does need to push his way towards him. Hopefully he doesn't get capped out by his teammate in the T-34-2, since it would be a real shame to end on a note of being a capping team in this sort of game when you really are trying to push home the advantage and take out the final tank who's been trying to pen you for the last 2 minutes in the battle. And yeah, it would be royally nice to see him get taken out. And the 283 does eventually get spotted, and he finishes off the game, stopping his teammate the T-34-2 from capping, which is something I always like to see, and ending up with even more experience. And there you go, the 60TP being an absolute monster. But that's not it, because there's plenty more in the next replay for you guys to watch as well. And of course our final tank is the VKK, who is going to have an outstanding replay on Mannerheim line and be able to push into the opponents, being a very aggressive but also a very consistent player to be able to come away with a potential victory. Now, I'm not spoiling this replay since this is a very, very good one, and I hope you guys really do prepare yourselves to see some crazy, crazy results. But starting off with the first pen on the IS-7, who is of course taking a good position, sticking on that corner. Unfortunately exposes too much of that lower plate, which allows the VK to be able to really pump him home. But with the heat rounds on this clam reward vehicle with 350 pen, they're not really going to struggle up against some of the solid opposite number tier 10 heavy tanks from the German line in the E100, and of course up against the Soviet heavy tier 10 with the speed of a medium, the IS-7, and maybe even a light tank, to be honest, with the power to weight the IS-7 actually has. But you're seeing here good use of the position. You're seeing him actually back down the slope, making it very difficult for them to be able to find the side weak points here, and of course on the other side under the turret, which is of course one of the biggest weak points of this tank. And although this is a better version of the Panzer VII, the tech tree vehicle, that is, I mean, just slightly worse than this tank, it still is very, very good, and you're able to really dish out a ton of damage. And already within the first minute and a half, or well, 2.5 minutes I guess, 3,900 damage, and it is really, really mad to see this tank working so well. And unfortunately for the E100, it's not going to be very well for him, and he shuts him down. Really nice work, good start to the game, and really ploughing rounds into the enemy heavies on this corner, and hopefully being one of the biggest impacts for his team in this area. And of course he's also blocked 2,400 damage, since this tank, if played correctly, where you keep yourself in a position where you are not just kind of sat out in the open or exposing yourself in a big sense so that you are kind of fully exposed, where people can find the weak points of this tank. If you're making it really difficult for them to be able to get rounds into you, then yeah, this becomes unbelievably good. And if you are an aggressive player and you do enjoy actually playing World of Tanks in a sense where, you know, you feel like you can impact the game, then this tank is perfect. And unfortunately it is a clan reward vehicle, so yeah, I mean, not everyone is going to be able to actually pick up this tank, which kind of sucks, especially considering how good it is. You see players like Daki using it all of the time, and there's no wonder with how powerful this vehicle really is, and how kind of cool it is to actually jump in and play up against some of the top tier 10s in the game, and even rivaling things like the 279E and IS-7 and the alike. But you can see here the Foch 155 thinking he's funny playing up against this, and unfortunately for him, even with hiding the turret weak point of that big horn of the Foch 155, he can still go straight through the actual armour of the French tank destroyer because of those 350 heat. Does bounce there. Kind of an unlucky shot, I guess, with the amount of pen that this does have. But, you know, you can't win every single time, just most of the time when you do play in a vehicle like this. Now you'll notice that the game is starting to really heat up. The team are somewhat winning. I mean, they're up by 1,300 damage at this point, and they're really now trying to push in to get up and mop up as much of that damage as possible, since, you know, when you're in this sort of game and your team are just ruffle stomping the opponents, you want to be the furthest one forward. And in a game where you're up against tier 10s like the E100, the IS-7, and where they have a decent amount of hit points and are on your side, there's nothing better. And when you have pretty much the entirety of your hit points left where you can take a ton of rounds, yeah, it's going to be very, very nice to see. And with an E100 giving you the flat area of his vehicle, yeah, it's not looking all too well for the enemy team's heavies. But the friendly team are starting to throw away a bit of their hit points, and that allows our player here in the VK to actually get a few more shots in before the game ends. And having done 8,000 damage, you'd be very, very happy with how it's going. But obviously a player like this would be wanting more, and that's exactly what you guys are probably wanting watching this video as well. And we want to see what happens when even the kind of more, I guess, meta tanks, things that are faster, things that have the armor but also the mobility and the kind of more consistent gun, I guess, things like the IS-7, that whether or not that these heavy tanks can actually compete. And of course, knowing that how powerful this tank actually is in the game, you probably would think that it is quite good, and you'd be right in that assumption, as we've seen from both the Maus and the tank before this one, the 60TP. As we've seen with the Maus and the 60TP, having speed and mobility isn't completely everything, and when the armor does work and you're using it correctly, you can come away with insane results. And unfortunately, the Emil 2 is actually ass on, and unfortunately for the Swedish heavy, he doesn't have any armor on the back of his vehicle. It may have a super godlike turret, but when you do find the rear of it, it doesn't feel too good. And unfortunately the Emil 2 is not going to be able to fully clip out our vehicle here, even if he was fully reloaded. But it looks like he is actually reloading. He loads a heat round, pens him, and then goes for a potential ram. Can he get him? Not quite. And unfortunately for the Emil 2, he's now in a bit of a sticky situation. Does he go for the ram on him? Can he finish him off with that final bit of damage from the ram? Unfortunately, the Emil 2 actually continues pushing up with him, and it is a bit of a pain to be able to get that final shot. And unfortunately, the gun depression of the VK is actually kind of messing him up here, and he's not able to look down onto the hull armor. But don't worry, his friendly Scharfeuter helps him out. But the game is not over. There is still a good chance you're going to win. There's pretty much a guarantee. But there is still a Waffle Panzer IV and an EBR in this game which need to be dealt with, and considering that the total combined damage that they are on is about 2,300, you'd be hoping to get a little bit more, having done over 10,000 damage in this replay. And with both of those vehicles over on this side, or what appears to be over on this side, you'd be expecting that the Waffle Panzer IV is up here in the bushes where usually all of the TDs go, and unfortunately for the EBR, he stops for just a little bit too long, and the Waffle does not manage to help him out and save him, and he does get shut down. But now talking about the Waffle, he does shut down the friendly Scharfeuter, but it's going to be curtains for him too, as he shuts him down, or at least helps shut him down, with the artillery finishing him off finally. And hopefully you guys did really enjoy watching these 3 replays, and if you did, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Primarily like the video, and obviously check out some of the other content on the channel if you enjoyed it, and hopefully you'll join me back in the next video coming soon. Goodbye.